Hey there, YouTube. Back here with another story, a Naruto and RWBY World Fusion Chai crossover event called Hush Dreams. A world where Naruto was thrown into the future after his first battle in the Valley of the End. He finds himself in the world of Remnant alongside Neo's events of a Roman holiday. This is one of my prized creations that I'm still working on despite being 40+ chapters in, so I hope you enjoy. This story is rated mature for mild language, violence, and allusion to sexual content. It hurt his face to feel each cold puff of breath as it frosted against it. Every step was miserable agony as his calves and hamstrings screamed and burned. Blood soaked through his charred orange and blue jumpsuit that hung tattered on his torso as he limped against the frost-bitten trees. A deep wound gouged in his chest, the crimson liquid dripping through his hands and down his young frame as he clutched the wound instinctively. Half-lidded cerulean eyes blurrily peered through a thick haze of the structures around him. He wasn't sure how he got here. Last thing he remembered was that he was fighting Sasuke, and now, strange creatures were attacking him now, and he couldn't fend them off in his state. He could barely walk after his fight and use the fox's power like that. How was he supposed to fight these bizarre fairy tale creatures? What was this place? Where was he? What were these creatures of black and white with red eyes? And they were so fast. He was barely able to stumble under that claw swipe. But in his state, he couldn't do anything other than crumple into a heap in the icy snow below. He couldn't even pick himself up as he felt a set of jaws rip into his right calf, and he reflexively jammed his left foot into the creature's wolf-like face. It howled in agony as it backed off and clawed at its face, but there were several others, and it was far from enough to cause lasting damage. And unfortunately, the damage to his leg was rather severe as it tore into his muscle and made it even harder for him to move. He felt the tendons and fibers of his muscles moving and burning as a foreign surge burned through them. There must have been enough chakra coming from the Nine Tails to heal his wounds. Not enough to give him anything more, as his body couldn't handle anymore without damaging him further. He was barely able to move, as it was after using the last burst the fox gave him. Hearing several more growls, he tensed further. They had him surrounded. What was he going to do? He was bleeding from the chest, and now his leg was bitten into. His skin still felt scalded from being burned by Sasuke's fire. His muscles agonized with every movement, and his limbs were hardly functional. He was barely limping, let alone walking. Now he was expected to fight these creatures that were almost as fast as Kiba in the state he was, with his chakra teetering on the verge of being completely drained. Was this what it felt like when Kakashi drained his chakra fighting that mad swordsman? On pure instinct, as one of the black wolf-like creatures lunged forward to take a bite of his jugular, he ripped a kunai out of his pouch despite the agony it caused him. If he were a second slower, it would have cost him. The black creature thumped heavily on top of him, knocking the air out of his lungs, but oddly no blood spilled on him. Instead of blood, smoke erupted from its throat as it lay on top of him, and then it dissolved into nothingness before his very eyes. What nightmarish dreamscape did he wander into? The others roared and charged, leaving him no time to think. Somehow adrenaline was enough for him to move again, despite his bum and bleeding leg. He scampered off the spot and they crashed into each other in the snow. Escape was still the right choice. He couldn't fight them all in his condition. He was lucky to take one, the other half dozen. A cabin in these icy woods? Maybe he had a chance of finding someone to help fight off these creatures. A chance, at the very least. If someone was crazy enough to live out here, they had to be capable of dealing with the local wildlife. One would assume, stumbling through the bitter cold, bouncing off trees and using them to weave around his assailants' attacks. The blonde fumbled as another abnormal wolf caught up to him. Its claw ripped into his back as its jaw clamped down on the right side of his collarbone. The other claw reached around his chest and gashed into his already deep wound. With a startled cry, he plucked his kunai into its head with his left as he was driven into the ice below. But he kept crawling and moving forward. The cabin was so close. He wasn't about to give in. Gritting his teeth, his hand slipped back into his pouch as he heard another running up on him, and with a turn, he flicked several shuriken. It howled in anguish as the throwing stars pierced and tore into its face. distracting it long enough for him to plant his lone healthy leg into its midsection and kick the beast away from him and toward another, knocking it off balance. Enough time, he hoped. Getting back on his feet was torture, but he pushed through the searing pain. He had to. There was no choice. This was his only chance of salvation. Were those screams? Oh no, was he wrong? Did he lead these creatures to attack people who couldn't handle them? His eyes widened as he saw several more creatures on the other side. And before them was child. Was there another child in that wagon? Fox, not asking for much, but give me something. Naruto roared as he looked at the sight in horror. I don't care if it tears my body apart. Give me a chance to save them. A dark, overwhelming surge seared through his stomach and agonizingly scalded him internally. He knew he had already used too much of the Nine-Tails chakra, but this was excruciating as he felt his muscles stretch and groan from the intrusion again. But it was plenty. It was more than sufficient as he felt the wound in his calf mend itself back together and allow his leg to function correctly. At least enough to move fast enough to intercept those black demons. Get the hell away from them! With his fist reared back, he thumped the first wolf straight in the face. It buckled and crumpled on the snowy path below as he heard a sickening crunch. Good! His punch was hard enough to crush his skull or snap its neck. Either way, one down, way too many left to go. I don't have enough chakra to do this, Naruto bit back a snarl as he stood before the young girl, scared witless in front of the even younger girl sleeping in the small red wagon. But here goes nothing. His eyes gleamed brilliantly as he crossed two fingers from both hands in a T symbol. KJ Bunshin no Jutsu. One for each. That was all the chakra the fox had given him. More than enough. They each picked a target, and with a kunai in hand, the tables turned for the creatures of this mysterious fairy tale land. He would not be put down without a fight. He would not let these children be endangered because of them. They slashed at each other, wolves and blonde shinobi. Their blows connected with every clone, slashing faces as they dispersed. But more importantly, kunais was driven into the skulls of each and every single one of the black abominations. So as Naruto was knocked and driven into the snow, blood dripping from several ribbons stripped from his cheek and jawline, he chuckled. Take that, stupid wolves. Only for his spine to shiver as he heard more growls. Numberker, there was more. He was exhausted. He used his remaining chakra to eliminate all the mangy humanoid wolves he could see. More was just too much. But as he looked up from the crimson-stained snow he lay in, his eyes shimmered as red-baited breath billowed out of the cabin. A much larger wolf meandered from inside, and he knew he was in trouble. But as it roared, his fear vanished. It wasn't coming for him. It charged the girls. No! He heard her scream as he picked himself up from the snow. He refused to allow anything to happen to them. He didn't care who they were. Naruto Uzumaki wouldn't let a child die in front of him if a breath was left in his body. Driving his shoulder into the much larger wolf's midsection as he tackled it into the snow, he tried to stay on top of it and put an end to it as quickly as possible. He still had his kunai in hand and aimed for the throat, but it was so much more robust and faster than the others. It rounded on him quickly and swatted his feeble down strike away with a single club blow to his shoulder. It knocked the blade out of his hand and sent him tumbling to the ground, his condition catching up to him. His wounds were still far from healed, even with the burst of chakra from the Nine-Tails. Several claw strikes to his back before he could move made him roar in pain as the beast jumped on his back. He tried to wriggle and writhe out from underneath it as he felt its steaming breath on his neck, doing everything he could to get free, but he felt this was it. He snapped his eyes closed. There was nothing he could do. He was spent, and unless the fox gave him more chakra and destroyed his body, this was his end, as the jaws were moments from clamping. There was a gust and a flicker of wind before he felt the pressure and weight on top of him lessen, closely followed by the weight completely lifting from him as two distinct thuds billowed in the snow beside him, as smoke erupted and dissipated. Someone else had arrived. There was no other explanation. Someone strong enough to kill the beast and cut it in half instantly. If Tsunade had his luck. Feeling a hand gently press and shake his shoulder, as he heard an older male voice. His cerulean eyes painfully opened, and his vision blurred as he looked up to see why he couldn't understand what was being said. He understood the man was speaking, but it was as if he was speaking a foreign language. Breathing laboriously, he could visualize the vague image of a man with black hair. It was difficult to make out any facial features as his vision was fading. The fatigue of fighting Sasuke and these creatures, and all his wounds having finally caught up to him. But he could make out one other key detail about this man which worried him. Why did he have brilliant crimson eyes? The only other man he knew had eyes like that was Sasuke's brother. Tai, this is inexcusable. I know. A man with dusty blonde hair refused to meet the gaze of the man yelling at him as he sat dejectedly at a table. I know, Qrow. No, don't continue to mope around. Do something. This can't continue. The man raised his voice as he waved his arms to no avail. Your daughters nearly died because you have become so lost you can barely function and care for yourself. A kid from who knows where is bleeding out on your couch as we have to wait for a medevac to get here to try and save his life. And he did more for your daughters while bleeding out than you. He raised another octave before a loud wail cut him off, and he recoiled as he turned in the direction it came from, seeing a very young girl with black hair and red highlights, bawling wildly. And now RWBY is crying? Sweetie, honey, I'm sorry we were so loud. Tai's tired and weary voice, as he gingerly rose from his seat to comfort his tearful daughter before a second set of wailing echoed in the room. Yang, honey. Yang, he's going to be okay. Qrow wrapped his arm around the young blonde girl's waist and pulled her back as she walked to the couch. They'll be here soon to help. His words died only for a moment as his eyes noticed something interesting as he gazed over the boy's ragged breathing. See? His aura is already kicking in and healing his wounds. That fast? Tai sounded perplexed while embracing his youngest before berating himself. That was the last thing he needed to say. He could see his oldest daughter's tearful state. She was already in a panic, and Qrow's piercing stare didn't help matters, so he quickly recovered with a gentle tone. He'll be good as new in a few days, darling. He just needs some good care and rest, but he can't get that if you are crying so loudly in his ear and if we're yelling. So we'll promise to stop fighting if you two stop crying. Promise, RWBY mispronounced as she looked up at her father's face, her eyes still wavering with tears. Promise, kiddo, Qrow replied as Yang sniffled in his grasp, as she still looked over at the boy that jumped in to help protect them from the grim. Hey, Pipsqueak! Yang broke her gaze from the young teenage boy injured on their couch and looked up into her uncle's caring gaze. Think you can make you and your sister some cup of noodles while your dad and I try to take care of the kid here? I brought some groceries when I came by and found you two were out. Got something special in there for both of you. Go put everything up. Okay. Yang weakly nodded as she allowed Qrow to redirect her and walked over to RWBY, gently taking her sister's hand. Come on, let's go make dinner. Uncle Qrow got cookies. Quokies? RWBY delicately was pulled along with Yang and followed at her side as they walked into the kitchen before seeing bags of groceries and pulled free. I help. I will put up. Joining Qrow by the couch as he knelt by the blonde-haired kid once more, pulling forth what was left of the emergency gauze and bandages they had left. He noted his frown was deep, but he also noted a look in his eyes and knew it well. What's wrong? The claw and bite wounds the kid received while fighting the Beowulfs. Qrow pointed out to his collarbone and across his chest as he had Tai help him gently roll him on his side to see how the wounds on his back looked. Are far less severe than they were. It's been less than 30 minutes, Tai. Those wounds were deep. Aura doesn't heal like that, and he's not actively using a semblance. Finishing rolling the last patch of gauze and bandages they had before lowering him back down to rest, noticing the hitched breath when they did, Qrow sighed. Then there is everything else. So many other wounds that can't be explained by the Beowulfs. Given the condition of his clothes, I can't even pinpoint them as his first attackers with all the burns and other nicks all over them. First-degree burns over his entire body with pockets of second-degree burns gradually recovered far quicker than they should have. Dozens of bruises that are no longer present from what I can see. Then there is the main event here, the massive gaping burnt hole in his chest. almost like something superheated trying to pierce his heart. It doesn't look like a normal burn. It almost looks electrical. I don't know how the kid is alive, let alone moving in that condition. It was a miracle he was able to do anything. Qrow looked utterly bewildered at the spiky-haired youth before gritting his teeth. Gazing at the sun-kissed blonde teenager staining his couch with his blood as they awaited the medevac, Tai knelt before him. Quickies? Not yet, Ruby. After noodles. But quokies. Smiling at the antics of Ruby and Yang in the kitchen, a warm sensation swept through him as he kept his gaze on the boy in front of him. It was because of him that they were here, and because of Qrow. He had become so lost. He needed to do better. He had to do better. And it started now. Whatever miracle it was, I am glad for it. Tai shook his head softly as he slowly stood up. Whatever it takes for someone to be able to move in that kind of state, there is something more to that person. At least that's what I like to think. Feeling something more in Tai's words as he spoke, and seeing the look in his gaze, Qrow said nothing. If this is what it took to get him out of his mire, he would not interfere. It was a drastic circumstance and something that should never have happened. But losing his second wife was not something he was prepared for. No one was ready for that. He still had issues from his previous marriage. After his sister left him alone to take care of Yang, he wasn't ready to be a widower. No man was ever ready for such a trial, not with 2 young children, but he needed to be, and it was now or never. Catching the sound of the medevac passing overhead, Qrow turned his attention toward the door. His brother-in-law was okay with his children for the time being, as he headed to the kitchen to help them out. He'd handle the evac. Lowly hanging her head as she followed behind her distinguished father and elegantly dressed mother, a young, petite teenage girl trailed behind. She wore a frilly white dress and pink bows on each side of her thin brown hair as she slowly lagged further behind, looking depressed. Everything turned out as she thought. It always did. Nothing new happened. Father was upset. Mother was quiet. She was despondent. It was a short walk home. It always was. She was never outside the gates for long, even with her parents. Her right eye teared up. Bringing her hand to rub her eye as it burned, she wanted to cry. The contact burned. She hated it. Why did they insist she had to wear it? Why couldn't she just be her usual self outside? Why did she have to visit the doctor so often to be told the same thing? To be given all these other tools, only for her father to ignore them in the end eventually. To demand that she speak to him, to use the voice she didn't have. And her mother sat there quietly. She would always softly speak to her in private and allow her to use her tools, ensuring she had them so she could communicate with others. But she always kowtowed to her father because it was easier, because she wanted a simpler life. Were they ashamed of her? Was that it? Shaking as she continued to follow her parents as they passed through the street, she knew all too well. She grew tired. She wanted to go somewhere else. The same path all the time, from the hospital and back home every single time. She wanted to travel somewhere else, to explore, to discover, to have fun. Her head snapped up as they came across several recycling bins. There she was, her best friend. Oh, was it time to play? Not now, friend. She would get into trouble. Why was she standing by the bin? What's she pointing at over the next street? Wait, no, my friend. It's not time for an adventure. Don't nod your head. We can't take off right now. Mom and Dad are right there. What are you doing with the lid of that bin? No, I'm sorry. Don't rattle it. We'll go on an adventure soon, I promise. No, trivia vanille. Her father's harsh voice scorned her as the recycling bin clanged to the ground and fell over as she stood beside it, her eyes wide in horror. Young lady, what do you think you are doing? This is unacceptable behavior. What do you have to say for yourself? Looking at her father's stern face, knowing he wouldn't believe her regardless of the truth, she lowered her head. She knew a tirade was coming from him. It was prudent not to try and just accept the outcome. Trivia, her father slowly descended upon her and towered over her demure form, standing purposely tall before her. Tell me exactly what you were thinking. Are you upset? Is something wrong? Use your voice, young lady, and speak. Her body trembled. He knew she couldn't. After every doctor's visit, they knew it wasn't possible. However, he always forced her to do so. He tried to make her use a voice she didn't have. She stared straight up into his eyes, shimmering as tears stirred within them. She opened her mouth, knowing the pain that was to come, and her throat burned as it tightened and clenched as she tried desperately. A rasping wheeze whistled from her, despite all her exertion, as tears streamed down her face. "Jim," her mother echoed as she handed her daughter her scroll from the purse she was carrying. "She tried, so let her use the scroll to tell us." "Fine," Jimmy Vanell grunted as he looked at his daughter as she slowly took her scroll from her mother. "But if it is the answer, I believe it to be." Trivia's eyes darted back at her father, and with a few presses on the screen, a response appeared, and she shoved it back into her mother's hands. Turning her head away, she heatedly walked past her mother and father, knowing the gate was just ahead. "Trivia!" She refused to make eye contact with either as she passed. She was too mad. How she hated that man, and her mother for doing nothing, and making her dress like this when all she wanted to do was, this stupid thing burned. In an attempt to flick out the contact from her right eye, she rubbed furiously on her right eye. She didn't want this stupid thing anymore. She just wanted to be herself. All she wanted to be was Trivia Vanille, not whatever her parents were trying to make her be. At least she's learned enough to head straight to her room when she's in trouble. Jimmy snapped as he narrowed his eyes at his disobedient daughter. "I'll have the servants clean this up, as knows she isn't going to." "Carmel, does it say what I think it does?" "Yes, Jim." Carmel sighed regretfully as she looked at her scroll with a disappointed frown and shook her head. "It says the same thing it always does when she comes up with an excuse. It just doesn't make any sense. The therapist said she was clinically cleared. Never trust someone whose job is to diagnose someone's feelings and mental stability." Jim rolled his eyes as he trailed after his daughter and toward their gate, a deep scowl on his face. "They make a lot of money scamming people that way, I'm sure. Just like they're scamming us over all this with Trivia, I tell you. She can talk. She needs practice, as her voice is simply too weak." Sighing as she refused to argue with her husband, deciding to let him believe in what he said, Carmel walked alongside him. Giving one last glance at her scroll, she slid it back into her purse. She then shook her head as she watched her small daughter easily slide through their gate and head down the driveway. It said what it always did, the same thing, and that made her wonder. It read Neo.